Way, way back long ago, lost in the mists of time, the buses were the kings of the forest. Now, they weren't particularly noble or wise. In fact, they were a bit slow. But it was a simpler time, and the buses ruled simply because they were larger than the other vehicles. Now, in addition to being big and a bit dim, they were very gregarious. They loved to chat with the other vehicles, to go around the forest, picking up bits of gossip and dropping off pieces of news. And when they got to the end of the path, they'd go back and do it all over again. And again. And again. And the only vehicles they didn't end up talking to were each other because, well, they weren't too careful about what they ate, and so they tended to emit an awful stench, which kept them from following too closely in one another's tracks. But in general, they were very happy with their lives, trundling along one by one, chatting away to their friends, and stinking. Well, the other vehicles were not so happy. In fact, they were downright fed up, and so they called a secret meeting late one night when the buses had all gone back to the depot. The family cars all came, and the minivans, the black cabs, and the sporty roadsters, and the motorcycles. Even the bicycles were there, skimming through the crowd and glinting in the moonlight. Well, the cars began airing their grievances. "The buses are big and noisy and stinky," said a Ford Mustang. "Yeah," added a Chevy Impala, "and they always expect you to stop and let them pull out in front of you." And worst of all, they all agreed, was the monotonous regularity with which they appeared. Just when you had dropped off into a really good afternoon snooze, a 22 would thunder by and wake you up. So you'd decide to get up and have a cup of tea, but just when you'd poured it and lifted it to drink, a 16 would rumble by and shake the treetops so hard that a papaya would come crashing down and smash your teapot in two. It was awful. Something had to be done. The buses must be made to leave the forest, and the cars all honked their horns and revved their engines in agreement. The bicycles started to say, "I'm not so sure that's so good," but the roar of the engines drowned them out as the plans were discussed and the decisions made. In the end, it was agreed that the cabs would do the dirty deed. And so the next evening, in the gloomy dusk, the cabs positioned themselves at a place where the road came out of the forest and around a bend where they couldn't be seen. And they waited. Their shiny black carapaces gleamed and their engines growled low and menacing. And they could hear the first bus approaching, singing a little ditty to itself. "The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, round." Suddenly, the bus found itself faced with a row of 20 black cabs lined up door to door and steadily advancing. Well, the bus was startled, and the cabs took advantage of its confusion to force it from the path and chase it up over a small rise and down the other side where the hill sloped away steeply, and the bus gathered speed and ended up going faster and faster and farther away until it was just a tiny speck in the distance. The cabs wheeled back into position and got ready for the next one to come down the path. And in this manner, all the buses in the forest were driven away. Well, the vehicles were glad at first. The air was fresher, the forest was quieter, and you could get in a good long snooze and a decent cup of tea without being interrupted all the time. But slowly, they began to realize that all was not well. For one thing, the vines and the trees began to close in on the path and block out all the light without the large bodies of the buses to keep them clear. And the path itself became all lumpy and bumpy without the heavy weight of the buses to pack the earth down solid. But most worryingly, the communities began to break apart. Without the buses going around the forest in their daily routine, passing on the gossip and the news and keeping everyone in the loop, the cars began to lose touch with what was going on with each other. They became increasingly isolated, and the cabs began whizzing around as if they ruled the road, and the motorcycles went hog wild. The bicycles watched this happening with growing dismay. They knew there was only one solution. They had to find the buses and bring them back. And so they set off up over the hill and down across the countryside, searching in fields and vineyards, hills and valleys, until finally they found the buses and pleaded with them to return. But the buses were reluctant. They had blundered into a cornfield and had been eating the corn, and the fuel was so clean that their exhaust didn't stink anymore. For the first time in their lives, they were enjoying each other's company. But the bicycles stressed how much they were missed and how the forest was coming apart without their steady presence to hold it all together. And as the buses listened to what was happening to their friends, they began to tear up so much they had to put their wiper blades on high. And so they agreed that yes, they would come back to the forest. All the other vehicles were overjoyed at their return. Even the cabs apologized and welcomed them home. And so the buses returned to their routine, going round and round, as jolly and dim as ever. but they were at least wise enough to realize that the reason they had been overpowered and forced from their home was that they were so vulnerable, spaced out one by one along the path as they were. And so now they always travel in packs to prevent anything like that from ever happening again.